Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is CJ the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be taking a look at the real drop-off in Democratic support in not only Virginia but also New Jersey now. We have just a week to go until Election Day, is exactly 7 days. And this is really this is the final stretch of the home stretch. This is really it for both campaigns to really hammer home their messages before voters actually go to the polls on Election Day. Now, both New Jersey and Virginia have early voting, so I think in Virginia there's already been around 600,000 or 700,000 early votes, and we'll kind of talk about that. I don't really have the Target Smart data in front of me, just because Target Smart's not really the most reliable source for early vote data either. Although in some cases, when we looked at it last year in states like Georgia, you kind of see like a red flag kind of emerging for the Republicans there. So perhaps we'll take a look at the early vote, not in this video. We're just going to be examining really the Democratic collapse in support in both Virginia and New Jersey. And as a side note, I will be live streaming on election night, so be sure to check that out if you're interested, probably once polls close in Virginia, which I believe is at 7 p.m. Eastern. So anyway, let's get right into it. So in Virginia, the polling averages for the leads for Terry McAuliffe have really fallen off. If we take a look at the latest polls out of Virginia, going back to really mid-October, there's not a single poll where McAuliffe is leading. It's either tied or Youngkin is up. And that really shows that this is a dead heat. This is a real dead heat. And if we're talking about the party in power overperforming their polls, even just a little bit with Youngkin at 48, he'd win. And that's one of the reasons why, as of today, I officially say this race is a complete toss-up, in my opinion. I think this could go either way. I'd be honestly really surprised if, say, McAuliffe pulled off a 5-point victory. That would really surprise me, because then we'd know that the polls were wrong again. But right now, McAuliffe is up just 1.5 points. And, that's very likely. That could be the margin that this race turns down to. The polls could be exactly correct. I mean, in 2020, the polls in Virginia were only about 1 point off. So even if they skew 1 point to Youngkin, we could see a narrow McAuliffe win. But that would still be a really bad sign for Democrats. It would obviously be worse for them if Youngkin outright wins. But even if this race gets within 1 point or 2, this was a race that was never supposed to be close. If we take a look at the early polls, McAuliffe had solid leads early on in this race. The first few polls or so was kind of close. They were all Republican internal. So once we started to get non-biased polls, which we really didn't have a lot until recently. A lot of these polls are either Democratically skewed or Republican skewed. And one of the reasons I don't really like to use FiveThirtyEight is because their polls are out of order. They have the change, the data for progress or whatever poll as the most recent or something like that. And that's not the most recent poll. These are the most recent polls. And if Youngkin continues to lead in the polls, then I would certainly say that would tip the race in his favor, just because Republicans have the enthusiasm factor, they have the energy, and you can really see that out in Joe Biden's job performance as president over time. Now, this isn't approval, this is job performance, but this is still a pretty important metric when gauging these sort of off-year races, because, over time, you just see there's more of a distance between those who disapprove and those who approve of Joe Biden. Earlier on in this race, when McAuliffe was polling a lot better, was polling 5 points ahead, we have to go back to August. And even when the Taliban, took over Afghanistan, there was a drop-off nationally, but in terms of the polls in Virginia, we really didn't see that reflected. It was still a race where McAuliffe was up on average by about 5 or 6 points. So there was really a lag, and I think one of the main things that I think really hurt McAuliffe was probably the debates, honestly, those ads about education, because that has become Youngkin's core issue, and I really think it's his best chance at winning, because beforehand, early on in the race, Youngkin didn't really have any issues. He didn't have an issues tab on his page. He didn't really have anything to run on besides, vague platitudes about Democrats overspending. Now he has, education to hammer onto McAuliffe. He has that comment he talked about where, parents shouldn't be telling schools what they should teach. And that's probably looped on Virginia TVs, I imagine, 24/7 in every Youngkin ad. And it's really working, because I've seen segments on CNN and other mainstream news sources where they talk to independents that, voted for Biden and are voting for Youngkin because of education. And obviously those are anecdotes, but anecdotes usually indicate a broader trend. And that's why you're seeing a state that went to Joe Biden by 10 points become really competitive, because you're starting to win over actual independents that, don't vote based on party and, decide to throw in for Youngkin because of education or something like that. I think that is the main issue of this campaign, honestly. And if Youngkin wins, he has, honestly, Terry McAuliffe to thank for that comment, because Terry McAuliffe hasn't really done enough, I think, to distance himself from that comment among independents and even among those who lean Democrat. It certainly fired up the Republican base in Nova, which otherwise probably would have more depressed turnout, and it's fired up Republicans all over the state. But Nova is super important because it really will determine the winner. If Youngkin can crack 44% in Loudoun, 41% in Prince William, even just 35 or 36 in Fairfax, he's in good shape statewide, because that probably indicates he flips Stafford, Chesterfield, Virginia Beach, James City County, these counties that were red in 2016 and voted for Biden in 2020. Obviously, for McAuliffe, his path to victory is a lot easier. He just needs to hold decent margins in the Nova area, and even if he loses some ground there, he can afford that. If he chips away at the margins in Western Virginia, even by like 3 or 4 points in each county, that'll go a long way for him, honestly. So, 538 really kind of has the same, it's not too much different. I noticed something 538 isn't doing yet, and I don't know if it's because they got embarrassed about doing it the last time, but they used to have that little thing that told you, what percentage each candidate had of winning with the little marbles and whatnot. And they don't have that anymore, because I think a lot of pollsters are afraid to call this race because they're afraid of being wrong. Because if Youngkin does pull an upset, it's probably something now you could kind of see it, but back in September, 2.8, you could probably see it. I mean, we were really looking at a really close race since September, but I mean, if you were to go back to August, the 538 average was pretty bad for Youngkin, down 7 points. He definitely wouldn't win with polls being that poorly, but when you're only down 1.9 points and you have the energy factor, you have a very good chance of overshooting your polls and actually overperforming. And, again, anecdotal again, but there is a lot of enthusiasm in Virginia. I've watched both Terry McAuliffe rallies and Youngkin rallies. There's a lot of enthusiasm at Youngkin rallies. There's a lot of signs. Everyone that I've talked to that's been to Virginia, even in Northern Virginia, there's so many red signs everywhere for Glenn Youngkin, which is really remarkable, because I think that indicates he's going to do better than Trump in the suburbs. That goes without saying. I think that's pretty obvious. I know it's honestly hard to do worse than Trump did in the suburbs. But, again, Democrats are really falling off from a 7-point lead in Virginia. And New Jersey, we're going to look at in a second. That's even worse for them, because this is that was a race that should have been safe. That's now actually becoming somewhat competitive. And for Democrats, that's just embarrassing, honestly. That's a pretty solid Democratic state. That's the equivalent of not really a Texas, but sort of like a Mississippi becoming really competitive. And we kind of did see that in 2019 with, a pretty conservative Dem, who was the attorney general running against Tate Reeves. But I mean, if this were to actually flip, it would be a political tsunami if New Jersey were to flip red and Virginia were to flip red this cycle. I still don't think that's going to happen. But with New Jersey, I'd probably put Chitterelli at maybe like a 5% chance, which is still pretty low, but I'm not saying it's impossible. It could happen, but I really, really think it's unlikely. Whereas Virginia, I think you flip a coin with Virginia. I don't think McAuliffe really has an advantage anymore. He did. Even back in September, I was giving him the advantage because, of Virginia's partisan lean and all that. But we're talking about an off-year race where these Democrats don't have to turn out. If Republican turnout is maxed, is really high, and Democratic turnout is average, Republican turnout could still swamp Democratic turnout. The way Democrats did so well in 2020 was because their turnout was maxed and Republican turnout was basically maxed. So you're seeing like basically the max of either party. I mean, obviously Donald Trump, a different Republican, probably would have done better than him in the state, but you're seeing a real max out in support there in Virginia. So I want to talk about New Jersey now too, because this is another race that's unexpectedly gone really competitive lately. Or not really competitive, it's gotten closer than it was. So we go back to the beginning of 2021, April, May, spring of 2021, and we have Phil Murphy just, crushing Jack Ciattarelli. And that's what you'd expect. It's New Jersey. And, even if the race were to finally manifest and Chitterelli were to get like 41%, that's like the average Republican margin in the state. We just take a look at how New Jersey voted in 2020, 57-41. That's like typical in the state of New Jersey. So that's kind of what you'd expect in the governor's race as well, honestly. But no, this race is tightening significantly, and you can really see that play out for Murphy when he's bringing heavy hitters to the state like Barack Obama to campaign for him. That really goes to show me that, some internal somewhere said Murphy was in trouble, because you wouldn't bring out somebody like Obama to campaign, in a safe blue state, and even if 2021 was supposed to be a bad year for Dems, you wouldn't think you would see that run through New Jersey, but it is apparently. And, the latest poll in the New Jersey governor's race has Chitterelli getting 44%. And, National Research was a Republican poll. It had it 45-42, but now you have, Pix 11, you have essentially unbiased polls, I guess, or not polls with an obvious partisan lean. And they're putting Chitterelli at 41, 42%, 44. If more polls like that come out, and if Chitterelli does get 44, 45%, that would be really bad news for the Democrats. And on top of losing Virginia as well, that's really bad for them. So, honestly, I would not be surprised at all if New Jersey turns out to not be as close as we're saying it is. This could be just an outlier poll that's come out. But I at this point, I almost expect Chitterelli to get 43, 44% in New Jersey, and it's very possible. In the 2017 gubernatorial race, Phil Murphy only got 56% of the vote against the lieutenant governor, Kristi's lieutenant governor, Kim Guadagno. She only got she got 42%. And that still was better than Trump in 2016 and in the 2020 election. So I think, if that's in a blue wave year, I definitely think Chitterelli could easily get 44% of the vote, if not higher. And that would be really good for Republicans in the state. And honestly, Jack Chitterelli is a strong Republican candidate. I think if he were smart, when this seat becomes open, in 2025, he should probably run again, because he's probably the Republicans' best chance at taking back the executive mansion in New Jersey. But overall, you really start to see that Democrats are scrambling in both New Jersey and Virginia. And, even the pollsters that are kind of aligned with Democrats are recognizing, Jim Carville is coming out and saying this is really bad news for the Democratic Party, because, if Virginia flips especially, it's disastrous. That's why they're trying to put all their resources in this race. Particularly, they have Stacey Abrams, they have all the national Democrats, Obama, Biden, Jill Biden, Kamala. They're all coming down to Virginia and stumping for McAuliffe, because I don't think McAuliffe thinks he could win on his own. And Glenn Youngkin doesn't bring Trump down, obviously, because bringing Trump down to Virginia would really hurt him among moderates and independents, especially those that didn't vote for Trump. These Biden voters that are voting for Youngkin. If Youngkin was campaigning with Trump, I think for a good portion of them, that would probably change their minds about him. But I think they probably determined that he's moderate enough to actually, govern in a way that's not what they think is going to be a Texas Republican or something like that, or a Trump Republican. So they'll throw their support behind him. But yeah, a week out, it's not looking good for the Democrats at all. I'll release my final predictions on Virginia and New Jersey probably a day or two before the race. We have the Monday before Election Day. That's probably when I'll release I might release them back to back too, honestly. Although that probably will hurt their viewership. Usually when I release two videos at once, one really doesn't get a lot of views. So we'll see about that. But anyway, thank you all for watching this video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss any new videos I put out. And a reminder again, I will be live streaming next week at around 7 p.m. Eastern when polls close in Virginia. 7 or 8, whenever polls close. More information on that. But I like to do election night live streams. They're fun. It's really interesting to get to talk to everybody and, kind of watch the results come in live. So anyway, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.